I've had couples come and sit down with us and say, I want to go and do this, and my wife, she doesn't want to do it, so I think I'm just going to go do it. And I'm like, well, if you go do it, then you're going to end up falling up. Your marriage is going to fall apart. And what's more important, your marriage or your ministry?
Well, today we are joined with Pastor Dennis and Colleen Rouse, who are the founding pastors of Victory Atlanta, which is actually an incredible church. And I was saying to my dad this morning that I don't think, when I'm thinking of pastors who have been established for a long time, that both are strong leaders. Like, you guys are always the first to my mind. And so the fact that you guys are joining us, and also you are personally in charge of keeping my parents, in line and responsible and everything like that. So it's just, of course, an honor to have you guys on and joining us today.
And I want to add something before we formally introduce you. Dennis and Colleen, I had the privilege of coming to your church back in 1990, 91. It was one of those 2 years. You were in a little storefront, probably around 100 people. Just fell in love with both your hearts, your love for truth, your love for people, your love for a human being, no matter where they came from, what they did, you just loved them. And you wanted to see them hear the truth so that they could be changed. And I saw that in you guys. And then I watched in awe as God built this church. And I think, it's well around 20,000 people now. The building facilities are some of the best in the country. And I watched a husband and a wife that both of them had very unique callings on their life, yet they did the hard work to be able to work together. And this, I'm sure, will come up in the podcast. But what a lot of people don't know, and I mentioned this when I did the podcast with Jacob Aranza, is that you are Lisa's and my pastor. There is no couple in this nation that knows Lisa and I better, knows our faults, knows our weaknesses, knows our strengths, knows our family as well as this couple. And whenever John and Lisa run into a difficult time, a time where we need help, we pick up the phone and call either Dennis or Colleen. And we always know we're going to hear the truth. And what we love about them the most is they have never, ever been intimidated, because Lisa and I have very strong personalities. They have never been intimidated by our personalities. They have spoken the truth to us in love. And I just can't thank you enough. I think only eternity at the judgment seat will it be revealed how valuable your input was into our lives, into our family. And Messenger International has reached millions and millions of people. And Messenger International wouldn't be as strong had it not been for Dennis and Colleen's input. So on behalf of this entire team, my entire family, thank you for being our friends and our pastors. So welcome.
Wow.
What an intro.
Wow.
Well, we'll jump into it. And of course, I want to turn it over to you guys. But I think obviously kind of jumping off the front end of this thing is I want to ask you guys, with you both being the leaders that you are, I know there's a lot of questions that we've had from pastors that have asked, well, how do I lead well with my spouse? And I know that comes down into a bunch of different areas. And I know we'll focus more on goal setting today. But I wanted to kind of kick off the conversation with that question of how you guys got into the rhythm that you guys are. How did you do it so well? Because you successfully and still are successfully pastoring a church over multi-generations and different time periods.
All right, so let's start with the best. The best starting point is I prefer you to go first.
Well, let me just tell you, those of you that are watching and listening, that if the two of us can collaborate together, then anybody can, because one of the reasons why we get John and Lisa is because there's a lot of similarities. We're both very strong personalities, very, shall we say, opinionated. And so, we know that the Lord has a sense of humor when he put the two of us together and then said, let's start a church with these two. So it's a miraculous thing, and it can be done. And I would say there are some non-negotiables for us. And because you find yourself in different roles, your husband and wife, your mother and father, you are leaders. you are pastors, you are preachers, so you wear multiple hats as a pastor. But the number one thing that the Lord's told me as my responsibility is, he said, don't let anything else take precedent over the relationship. So I might be in different roles, but the relationship, the covenant of marriage is more important than a role of a pastor, because those things will change, right? The role of a parent, those things change. There's an expiration date on that card, right? So you have to keep the main thing the main thing. And why that's important is there will be times when you are, like, we've been in meetings together around the exec table making decisions, and he and I might have a difference of opinion. Or let's say he actually, on very rare occasions, would say something that I thought, that's not good. And so I have to guard myself that I don't try to all of a sudden exert some sort of dominance over him because I'm worried about protecting a decision. My relationship with my husband as his wife is my primary responsibility and delightful responsibility. And it helps me to keep that as the number one thing. That just kind of corrects and prevents a lot of unsettling behavior.
I want to add a little to that. I think when we started ministering together as a couple, as pastors of the church, one of the things that we talked about, we asked ourselves, okay, who's out there pastoring churches where you have a husband and a wife that both minister in some capacity and have strong leadership gifts, strong drive in them, and actually represent to their church, to the body of Christ, a strong marriage, a strong family. And it was sort of disappointing when we started thinking through all of our friends that were in the ministry, that we would say they're a great couple in the sense of they're great leaders or they're doing a great job with their church, but it was not a marriage or a family that I would model my family after. And so we kind of made a decision right at the beginning. This was a strength of ours. We had a God gifted us in our marriage. He put us together, and he taught us how to work together with the challenges of our personality clashes. And we thought, okay, we're going to pastor this church out of our strength.
Yes.
And our strength is our marriage and our family. That's the first thing. And so it was part of our foundational vision. We have 4 pillars in our vision, and the first one is building a strong family. And we realized that one of the things that was crucial in every church is an environment of strong families where you have strong marriages with raising kids that are actually going to serve the Lord. And I think we all know that when we look at the body of Christ, we see a lot of broken families, a lot of broken marriages, and also in the ministry, broken marriages in the ministry. And so we just made a decision. We actually shared it with our church right off on the front end, that our relationship, our marriage, is more important than the church. And so we want you to know that. So there may be times where the church starts to kind of creep into our family and our marriage in an unhealthy way. And if that happens, I just want you guys to know in our church that we're going to pull back and pay attention to our family and make sure it's healthy, so that you get the best of us. You're not getting some fake preachers up there teaching you stuff that they're not living.
Exactly.
And if you're a pastor and you've ever stood up and preached out of your life to the congregation, your family life, there's nothing worse than to have your spouse and your children sitting on the front row listening to things that they know are not true about your family. And so you preach out of who you are. You transform a church through your character that you're representing to the church. And so you share your weaknesses and you share your strengths. And I think the first 5 years was the most challenging.
Yeah.
Because we had so much pressure to build the church.
A lot of dynamics going on.
Our finances weren't that great at the time. We had 100 people a year for the first 5 years until we really got going. And it was, I felt like it was a testing ground that God took us through to help us to become a strong couple.
Well, and I love maybe even within this, and I think this leads really well into what we wanted to talk about today, is you guys talked a lot about kind of creating that vision and that goal. I remember hearing, I think it's Pastor Jimmy Evans, he talked about, he said, once a year, my wife and I will go away, and he said, we'll have a vision retreat, and he said that we'll fight a ton on that vision retreat, but he said, we'll come into alignment and we will not fight anymore over that next year, because they come into an understanding of what is, what's the ultimate goal here, what's the dream, what's before us. And I think a lot of, for pastors, that's maybe something that they've struggled with, of setting that dream and dreaming with their spouse, or executing that dream to their team. And so how did you guys, from starting with you two, take those things that God was showing you and carry it out to your church and communicate it in such a way?
Well, the interesting thing is that we all have dreams, and we all sort of have goals in our hearts. We have these ideas of these things that we want to attain. The challenge is how to begin to articulate and organize and capture and submit it. That's where we kind of can fall short, because it's important to be able to really grasp it and write it down, which is why the idea of going away and praying together and just listening first, so that we are obtaining something that is heavenly and not just a man-made ideas. And because the goals are really supposed to be an act of faith, right? They help create new behaviors. They help us stay focused. They harness our passion and our energy and use it for good. And it reminds us, having those goals reminds us to live with intentionality and not haphazard and not careless or not cavalier. And the other thing that it does is it really becomes that focal point through the storm. So it keeps us going through the storm, because we have these goals that we have written down that we know are sacred in a sense, because God gave them to us. And so we have personal goals, we have goals for our marriage and our family, and we have goals for the church. So we don't just write down the goals for the church, because the covenant is the most important thing. So shouldn't we have goals pertaining to something we want to continue to grow in and flourish, right?
How did you keep your conversation in your marriage from continually being on the church? Did you actually set appointments with each other saying, okay, for the next hour, we're going to talk about our visions, our separate visions, our unite our vision? Or did you just kind of free flow talk about it all throughout your day as you're together, maybe getting into bed at night, talking to each other in bed? I mean, the reason I'm asking is I am getting some young couples that are reaching out, and they're pastors of significant churches. And they said their greatest challenge right now is trying to do this together. In other words, they're saying it would be easier if it was just me doing it, or just her doing it, and not us doing it together. But yet they're seeing the benefit of them doing it together. And I think it's what I'm getting from these guys, they need the practical. When do we stop talking about what's going on in the church around, in our household? Did you guys put any boundaries to protect?
So let's back up for just a moment and talk through this a little bit. When we started the church, we took time out, and we would go on, just like Jimmy Evans, we'd go on, vision retreat kind of thing. Our tendency was always to go to the mountains and as high up as we could go. And wherever we stayed, we had to have a view that was really long.
Expansive.
Big.
Yes.
We felt like there was something about being able to look out in a broad expanse that helped enlarge our heart, enlarge our vision a little bit, as opposed to just looking at some trees wall, or water or whatever. We had already established, even before we started the church, kind of a routine of family day, family time, where we would always spend a certain day together as a family, and that was a no compromise zone, so that our daughter knew that day we're not doing church. We're not doing ministry. We're not talking about church. We're going to have fun. We're going to enjoy ourselves together, because I think if you don't have fun as a couple regularly, consistently, then when you do get into the rough patches and disagreements, you don't have enough positives to outweigh the negatives. Mm-hmm. It's like Jimmy talks about this too, about banking. You know, you're making deposits and you're making withdrawals. And if you make more withdrawals than you make deposits, eventually you go bankrupt. And this is what happens to any marriage. A marriage doesn't go bankrupt overnight. It's over a period of time where you just stop making the deposits. So you have to be very intentional. Yes. You have to be very intentional with your actions in terms of what you do. I do think there is a little bit of an onus on the husband, because he tends to be the one more in demand at the front end of a ministry, because he's usually doing most of the preaching and most of the leading, not all of it, but most of it. And so he has to be the one that pulls his ego back enough to say, okay, I'm not going to just live out. I'm not going to charge ahead without my spouse. Mm. A leader's no good if they're not taking anybody with them. And I think
nobody's following.
It's easy to go out and charge out ahead, but if you don't have your wife with you, I've had couples come and sit down with us and say, I want to go and do this, and my wife, she doesn't want to do it, so I think I'm just going to go do it. And I'm like, well, if you go do it, then you're going to end up your marriage is going to fall apart. And what's more important, your marriage or your ministry? Yeah. And as soon as the church senses that the ministry is more important than the marriage, then they begin to lose faith and confidence in your family. And they start to doubt that your family is where it needs to be. And sometimes they'll keep asking you and putting demands on you, because as long as you keep giving in to that, they'll literally, a church can literally steal a marriage apart if you're not careful. So you have to be very intentional. You have to be very intentional in your prayer life. I think at the very beginning, I would get up every morning and go out at least for an hour and pray over our marriage, over our family, so that when we came back together, we kind of established our day versus waiting to react to the day. We believe in the power of our words. We believe in the power of the Word of God when we speak it over ourselves. And when you have that kind of consistency, and I'm saying that throughout the entire period of time that we pastored the church, there would be a rare occasion that we would not have a consistent family day. Maybe some special thing might come up every once in a while, but if it would, then we'd take some other days apart, make sure we were spending time together. And secondly, we would also periodically share what God is sharing in our hearts, like you just said, throughout the week. I don't think Colleen either wants to do something without the other person's input. I want to hear what she has to say about it. I value what her words are about it. And she values my words over some of the ministry things that she does separate from me. So we share it with each other. We go to the beach, we sit on the beach and we just dream, we write, we talk, we set some goals, and then we go back a month later. All right, how are we doing on this? Are we doing good on this? And when we aren't doing good, we brought in a pastor that every month for, 12 to 14 years in our church, to counsel us, to counsel our church staff. And he would stay at our house so he had to spend extra time with us, 3 or 4 hours talking to us. But we needed to do that so that we'd stay on top. Because I would sit there, I don't know if this ever happened to you, John, and he'd ask the question, how's everything going in your marriage? And I would everything's great, fantastic. And then he turned to Colleen, and it was a different story. And I didn't know that until he asked the question.
That's pretty typical, though.
Yeah.
I think that in thinking about the young couples who are, because you're excited about ministry, you're excited about what you're doing, you're trying to figure out your lane, you're trying all of these things. And so it's very easy for you not to be able to protect the marriage because you're so gung-ho on this new vision, this new opportunity. And the thing is, you cannot let the drive that's in you for ministry be greater than the passion that's in you for your marriage. And so to preserve your marriage, you do things to protect and safeguard. So, for example, we would come home from the office, and especially when Lauren, our daughter, was, small, and she's in the car with us, right? We picked her up from school, we'd come in, and we would, when we crossed the threshold from the garage into the house, that was it. We clocked out to the best of our abilities. And so it's a discipline. And, nobody is going to establish that discipline for you. You have to do it, and you do it because your marriage is important. Your covenant is important, because let me tell you something. You might be talented, you might have revelation, but when you stop having overflow of this relationship, then you are not functioning at the place that you could be. You don't have as much life to give, because everything we do in ministry should be an overflow, an extension of, first of all, our private time with the Lord, and then our relationship with one another. That's the power of the covenant that's supposed to feed into your everything else that you do, whether it's your work life, whether it's ministry or not.
So I believe in this philosophy of life that you try to do like Jesus did. And when you look at Jesus, you recognize Jesus lived in a time with no internet, no social media, no marketing, nothing, no production team, nothing to make him famous or anything like that. He never left the country of Israel. He rarely left Jerusalem. And he spent all of his 33 years with a few people. Not, there were some masses when he had some big meetings, but predominantly with a few people. And yet here we are, almost a couple thousand years on the other side of that. The entire world knows who Jesus is without any of that. And it's because he invested in a few people to the point where their lives were so transformed, so dramatically transformed, that they became transformation people. And I think what I see happening now is so many pastors get so caught up in the celebrity game of trying to be famous, cool, look at my new post, or look at my new cool thing I'm doing, and my new clothes and all this stuff. And they've completely missed the point. And it's all done in the name of influence. I'm trying to influence. I'm trying to be an influencer. But they're influencing in a way that I can't tie into Jesus sometimes. I can't tie into who Jesus is. So we're more from you influence from who you are, not from who you try to make yourself to be, in front of people. Jesus, it says about Jesus in Philippians 2, he says he made himself of no reputation. That's an interesting statement. He made himself of no reputation, taking on the form of a bondservant, coming in the likeness of men. He was God in the flesh. Today, if he came on the scene, you'd have all kinds of social media gurus trying to promote him and make him famous. That's probably why he had to come when he came, because of the world that we live in right now. And so I think that ties into the state of your family, your marriage, because the main thing you're trying to influence people in is to have a strong foundation to build from. And if you don't have that foundation in your home and your family and your children, like the Bible says, what's the profit if you gain the whole world and you lose your own soul? And I would say, lose your family. Like, how disappointing is it that you have a great church, but your kids are not serving God?
Yeah.
They're not serving God. They're in the church, but they're not living for God. And that's, to me, the greatest accomplishment in our life is our daughter.
Yes.
Who grew up in the church, did not backslide, took a gap year, went into missions for a year, came back, went to college for 4 years, navigated college as a Christian, stayed pure, stayed holy, stayed a virgin until she was 28, married a virgin when she was 28, who was the same kind of person, because she is attracted to like, and has a family, 3 kids, and she's trying to perpetuate that same generational thing. And that's what I think
That's the legacy.
When you look back on your life, at the end of your life, you're not going to be thinking about how big your church was or how many people you knew. You're going to be thinking about how strong was my family, how strong was my marriage,
well,
how did my kids turn out.
who's going to be bedside when you go home to be with Jesus?
Your
You
family.
know, your 20,000 people in the church, or your family, and your those you pour into the most. As you said, Jesus had 3 of the 12. Those that you really poured into, they're going to be right there. But first and foremost, your family.
Yes.
And I know, I want to say, when our kids were young, I had to find out what they were interested in, and then I would do it, because I always felt that if they saw me take interest in them, what they liked, did fun things with them, when it came to spiritual things, they would listen to Lisa and I. So, I mean, we played cards, we played board games, we played street hockey. There was one point, Art and I don't know if you remember this because you were pretty young. We played street hockey every single day from 4 to 5 out in front of our house with our.
I remember that because I was traumatized because Addison would put me in goal and just shoot pucks right at me.
Yes,
So-
I remember that very well. You were the goalie. And, we played with our next door neighbor who was a WWF wrestler. And, he was 6'4", 240 pounds, 3% body fat. And I'd skate into him and go flying back. But we laughed. We had a good time. We would play when they were younger, like 4, 5, 6, 7. I would just get a big plastic ball and a bat, and we'd have, across the driveway as a single and this. And then golf came along, and I started them out. They were 7 years old, so I put them at the 150 yard and that was their par 4. My par 4 was 400 yards, and we would talk. And I found that when it came to the tough issues, they would listen to mom and dad because mom and dad were so connected with them in their life. And it was hard. I know every day I made up my mind when I was home, because there were some years I was gone so long. When those kids, when my boys were out of school, they came home to me being at home. So if that meant I had to leave the office at 2:30, 3 o'clock, I left, because I was going to be there to do something with them. And I think this is the thing that Lisa and I talked about early on. We can minister to millions of people, but if our boys don't want to be beside our bed and we go home to be with Jesus, we failed.
Yeah.
And so I just can't tell you how much I appreciate you saying this, because I think the social media pressures do put a lot of pressure on young pastors.
They do.
They see their friends, their churches are at 1,500. My church is at 700. My church is at 200. Whatever it is, it's all relevant, relative. They feel the pressure. They're not doing enough, and they equate it to time instead of stepping back and saying, what's really important that I should be investing in? And I'll never forget the time we were on a golf course, Dennis, and you said to me, your church at that time was, I think, at about 14,000 people. You said, John, I never really wanted to have a big church. I mean, it really wasn't your goal. I remember do you remember saying that to me? I remember the golf course. I remember where we were at, the topography. And I was like, wow, you never really, that wasn't my goal to have.
I wanted a healthy church.
Yeah.
Never thought about it in numbers. In all honesty, and this is going to sound weird, of all the goals that we set, none of them was the number of people in the church. We realized that once you start getting trapped in that area, you start making some compromises to get numbers. And there are certain things I've learned as a pastor, I've watched and observed over the years around the country. There's certain things you can do that attract people that aren't necessarily biblical things. If you preach a lot about self-motivation, personal improvement, things of that nature, and you stay on that all the time, that's kind of your genre, you're going to attract a lot of people, because there's a lot of people that love that kind of thought. If you start bringing correction, you're going to weed through people. And we studied the life of Jesus, and we just thought, okay, Jesus, when the crowds would start building, he'd turn to them and say some pretty strong things, like, if you want to be my disciple, you're going to have to be willing to forsake your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, and your own life if you want to be my disciple. And then it says in John 6 that a lot of them stopped following him after he said certain things about, you're going to eat my flesh, drink my blood. So Jesus was never after the crowd. He was after the heart of people to transform them. And I think that starts in the family, in the way that you project the family. It's not the only thing you do as a leader, but if you don't have that, and Lord knows we've all been in ministry long enough we've all had people that we've looked up to and saw as great leaders who just did not have strong families, did not have strong marriages. And I've often thought of we ought to do a podcast sometime called The Green Room.
No.
And talk about what goes on behind the scenes after people preach. And so what we've learned is, and this is one of the reasons why I think we connected with you guys so strongly, is because as soon as we met you, we realized you and Lisa have tremendous giftings. You've got a great family, but you almost have an impossible situation because you're both going in two different directions most of the time, preaching. And how do you create a healthy family with that? And somehow you got 4 boys who all love Jesus and serve the Lord. That's the greatest accomplishment. I don't know if you see it that way, but I think it's the greatest accomplishment you have in your life. There's nothing greater than those 4 boys. And
You've said that many times, and believe me, those words carry such great weight and such great comfort.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Healthy Pastor Podcast. If you're looking for a community of pastors to grow alongside with, we encourage you to join our Healthy Pastor community. You can apply by going to healthypastor.co. Before you go, make sure you subscribe and rate this podcast wherever you love to listen. And again, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you next time on the Healthy Pastor Podcast.